This video is a discussion around duty in the fantasy genre, but most importantly, why it's stupid. The premise of this video being that duty shouldn't be what motivates one's actions logically and ethically speaking. Let's get into it. What is duty? In this section, I'm going to show some good and bad examples of characters displaying duty. First example we have of bad duty is, of course, Sir Christian. His duty was to be Kingsguard. Failing this duty led him through an emotional rampage. This is an example of bad duty because often Knights of the Kingsguard break their oaths that seem rather pointless. The biggest one being that they can't have sex. The fact that sometimes people don't obey their duty isn't evidence that duty is bad in itself, but it can be evidence that some duties are more unreasonable, like celibacy. At its face, it doesn't seem like a bad idea because having a lover can distract you from protecting the king, but it seems, like I said, pretty unreasonable. You're essentially waiting for people to break their oaths and the fallout that could come from that. He may bring up the point that the members of the Kingsguard agree to have these oaths, but in Jamie's case, he agreed when he was only around 15. While he is an outlier, it still proves that the context under which you say your oaths does matter. Another negative example of duty in House of the Dragon would be Viserys. His duty is being king even though it seems like he doesn't really want it, and the stress and literal throne itself was hurting him. Since he was appointed to be king through the High Council over his cousin Rhaenys, it would probably be against his duties to resign as king, which seems pretty pointless. King Aenys is a good example of this as well. Some examples of good duty though would be like fighting against evil. I know that's broad, but often characters in fantasy feel obligated to fight because the force they're fighting against is just straight up evil. Examples of this would be like the rebels versus the Empire, Harry versus Voldemort, and Lord of the Rings. Obviously, all these examples have nuances and are more complicated than that, but at its core, it's pitting evil characters against good characters who feel obligated to stop the evil for whatever reason. In these instances, duty can be good because it fuels you to do the right thing, but I think it's just important to get it out of the way that duty isn't inherently bad. With that out of the way, we can define exactly what duty is and explain why it's bad. The Google definition is this: a moral or legal obligation, a task or action someone is required to perform, and I think it would be fair to include job responsibilities as being your duty as well, since that's in a lot of definitions of the word. Most people say that your responsibilities within a job are your duties. Now that we understand what duty properly is, I can argue against it. Why duty is bad? The first point I'm going to bring up is that duty can conflict with morality. Morality being what's right and wrong to do in a certain situation. For instance, in House of the Dragon, in a lot of medieval settings, it was a woman's duty to be a childbearer and subservient to men, so on and so on. This is an example where actively doing your duty or supporting someone else doing their duty makes the world worse. Under these instances, we can't really say that duty is necessary or even warranted. It would seem better if we got rid of it altogether. Another example of this is when Ned kills a man of the Night's Watch in the first episode. Yeah, sure, it's Ned's duty to kill him because the crow left his watch, but he had a good reason to leave, and he was actually doing a good thing by telling people about the White Walkers. Even if Ned completely believed him about the White Walkers and thought the crow was right, he would still be obligated by his duty to kill him. Because of this, you can even say the argument that duty leads people to do the wrong thing instead of the other way around. Basing morality from legality is also suspect because, like we all know too well in real life, the law can be exploited and worked around, and some things that are legal aren't moral, especially in Westeros. So it doesn't make sense that someone's duty, which largely arises from the law, should be seen as an obligation in the first place, at least logically and ethically speaking. Another problem in the definition stated earlier was that duty can be included into someone's job as well. James' job was being a Kingsguard, so therefore his duty is to protect the king, but he took those vows when he was only 15 years old. So his vows are his duty, but wouldn't it seem kind of wrong to say that he has to keep his vows even though he made them when he was a kid? This is why contracts signed by minors in real life are treated differently. Not to apply real life legality to Game of Thrones, obviously those laws aren't in place in that world, but it shows that a child probably doesn't understand the scope of their actions, especially when it comes to an oath that will last them the rest of their life. Jaime himself even regrets the decision he made, since Aerys essentially just kept him hostage after that point. By the way, if you like hearing different perspectives regarding the fantasy genre, and especially how that intersects with morality and just abstract discussions like these, then subscribe. It takes no time and it helps me out a lot, and I post weekly. But back to the video. So like we discussed earlier, Jaime being forced to keep any of his vows at all is a questionable duty in the first place. And on top of that, him killing the king would obviously be against these vows and the law. Sure, you could argue that duty includes morality and killing the Mad King would have been the correct thing to do, so therefore Jaime was fulfilling his duty, but that contradicts the other definitions of duty people commonly hold. It's illegal, and Jaime is breaking his vows and failing to do his job. At its core, this is why I disagree with duty. It contradicts itself, and it's hard to really have a good grasp or concept of what it is since it's somewhat abstract. Since it's so subjective, it leads to women believing their duty is to be below man and unjustly executions when none of this is necessary. A common counter argument I saw for people being pro-duty is that duty opposes pleasure, and pleasure pleasure is the source of a lot of wrongdoing, so something that stops people from partaking in their pleasures is a good thing. This would be like Jon Snow's duty to the Night's Watch even if he wants love or to go protect his family. This pleasure versus duty conflict is pretty prevalent in A Song of Ice and Fire, which is all dandy, but I will argue that the pursuit of pleasure should motivate people's actions over duty. For instance, the reason why we do anything is essentially for pleasure. People get up and work to sustain their life so they can enjoy their free time. People go to college for a higher pay so they can enjoy their free time more. Pleasure obviously isn't inherently a bad thing, even when it's a person's main goal in life. It's short-term pleasure that people are mostly against, but you don't need to follow duty to oppose that, because negative short-term pleasure damages your ability to have long-term pleasure. For instance, if my main motivation in life is to seek pleasure, and I eat a whole bunch of junk food, which is a bad short-term pleasure, then I'm negatively affecting my long-term pleasure of having a healthy life, which would be much more valuable. It's like Viserys naming Rhaenyra heir. Sure, it gives him some solace and enjoyment that he can honor his dead wife Emma by making their only child heir to the throne, but overall it's bad because it starts a war, which would overall bring down pleasure for pretty much everyone in Westeros. And if Viserys was able to see the results of his decision, he probably wouldn't have made it in the first place. You don't need duty to tell you that these things are wrong. What gives the most people enjoyment seems to be more consistent in informing what we should do or not. And this factors into my next talking point about how morality essentially makes the concept of duty pointless. These are the main reasons why I think morality should be the sole factor in deciding your actions when appropriate, or at the very least, it should completely replace duty as a motivator for action. There are situations where duty can lead you to do the wrong thing, and it seems to be pretty inconsistent. Like we established earlier, duty doesn't always align with doing the right thing. So when characters blindly follow it, it can have pretty bad results. At the core of things, we should probably want to do what's right, so I see this as good justification to not follow duty. You can't break duty down to just doing what's right, because as I explained earlier, there's instances where people had duties that encourage them to do the wrong thing. While there are a million theories on how to do the moral thing, the one I stated earlier, which would be maximizing pleasure, would seem to be better than just following duty. While you can argue that morality is subjective in itself, what's defined as moral doesn't have strict restrictions like duty has, and these strict definitions make the term unreasonable at times, like Jaime in the Kingsguard. If a guide to action, if you will, is inconsistent, like following one's duty to behead an innocent man, for example, then we probably shouldn't follow it. If my framework allows me to do bad things, then it's probably not a good framework. Sure, sometimes it could lead to good outcomes, but the logic it uses to get there would still be faulty. This leads to my next point, that duty is way too subjective. It's more of just a social guideline thing rather than something one should follow for all of their actions. For instance, we brought up the example earlier of women in Westeros having children as their duty. The world won't end if you stop forcing people to have kids. They'll just have kids on their own. If anything, this doesn't seem like something to better society, but seems more like a tool to just manipulate people into doing what you would want. If you can convince others that they have a certain duty to do something, then they'll feel obligated to do it. The Night's Watch is a pretty good example of this, since a lot of them are there for unnoteworthy crimes. Pip, for example, refused to do sexual favors for a lord and was accused of stealing silverware. Even if he did steal the silverware, I think his duty to serve the Night's Watch would be unfounded. Why should he have to freeze his ass off and never touch a woman again because he stole some forks? In reality, duty could just be anything a higher group of people tell you it is, at least when it comes to the world of Westeros, real life, and just fantasy in general, and how duty is commonly defined. But you also see this type of justification for wars. If your lord decides to go to war, gets his banner called, then it's your duty to fight in a conflict that you had nothing to do with in the first place, simply because people who have more power than you told you to do so. These realities within the concept of duty in Westeros and real life and other fantasy genres makes it pretty unreasonable to follow, in my opinion. This video was inspired by arguments in my comments section, so thank you guys for the ideas. If you disagreed with anything in this video, then comment down below. See you.